Welcome to the Women of Ambition podcast. I'm your host, Alyssa Calder-Hume, and today we are talking about burnout with Elle V. Thank you so much for being here, Elle.
Oh, Alyssa, I'm so excited to be on. Thank you for having me.
I just want to dive right in. Tell us how you have become an expert on burnout, because I know that there's a story behind that.
There is a story behind that. So I was the young, ambitious, high achieving creature that wanted to build this career and help a lot of people. And for a very long time, I found myself really caught up in that cycle of hustle and grind that we're taught and modeled with typical ambition. So I worked my tail off. I studied my tail off. I did the 60-hour weeks and got the degrees, and then did the 60-hour work weeks and worked for people and built a private practice. My background originally was in or is in alternative medicine. I wanted to help people. I wanted to help people get healthy and well. And I wanted to help people get to the root cause of why they weren't healthy and well. Little did I know that early on in my career, that working with people with their physical ailments would eventually lead to me realizing that most people's physical ailments are stemming from a much deeper struggle mentally and emotionally. And burnout is one of many ways that can manifest as issues in the mind and body. But my personal experience with it all was really powerful and was really life changing for me. I had been practicing for 9 years. I had a really successful private practice. I had a waiting list of patients. My schedule was booked, making six figures. Girl, it was great. Like everything looked good on paper,
You check all the
like you
boxes.
could totally, yeah, like you could
Oh,
talk to
man.
someone and
Do you think there's like a good girl vibe for ambitious women? I think there's a good girl thing
yeah,
in there. I'm a good girl. I've
totally.
gone to school. I have the job. I work the hours. I have the
See,
suit.
see what I've done,
Uh-huh.
right? See how great I am and I can balance it all and I'm this Wonder Woman and I can figure out how to like do all these great things and help all these people and little do most people know, right? I mean, we've seen it the past couple of years, burnout surging more and more and more because of everything in the outside world. But the struggle inside was real. I'm at like pinnacle of career success, right? I have all the independence. I do have the freedom to set my own hours. And inside, I'm just completely miserable. I absolutely hated. I was in a city and I never wanted to move to a city, but I did because I thought it was the right thing to move to the big city and build the career. And I ended up falling into this spiral where I was like piling on the weight and I was getting really depressed. I was choosing very toxic relationships and omitting good relationships in my life. It was fascinating how ambition created so much self-sabotage.
Mm-hmm.
My pursuit of success, this thing that was outside of myself, really. Income is an outside thing, right? To make money, satisfaction, helping people. There were so many things that were successful in my outside world, but my inner world was just struggling. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's really what burnout is. I think when people look at burnout in a very traditional sense. Like I'm talking like in the corporate conventional sense. Well, burnout is you're pushing yourself too hard, take some time off, manage your time better, you'll
Mm-hmm.
be fine. Let's just take a quick reset, go on a vacation and you'll be fine. And it's not that. I really believe that it's a crisis of identity. I think it's a calling from the soul saying something needs to change because the mind is starting to crumble and the body is starting to crumble. And if you stay on this pace, it's nothing pretty is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I found myself. I had all the success on paper, but inside my identity was completely struggling. And I feel like burnout is this opportunity that there's a version of you that is just screaming to break free,
Mm-hmm.
screaming to say, stop and do something different. And inside of me, I knew that I wanted to live in the mountains. I knew that I wanted to have a life with more adventure. I knew that as good as I was in private practice, I just didn't want it. I didn't want it. I don't know if I ever wanted it. I think I did it one time, but I had all of these wake up calls just like slapping me in the face. And no vacation was going to take care of that, right? No, no, I don't care how long I sat under a palm tree with a pina colada. It was still my soul saying, wake up, sister. You
You
got to
weren't
wake
you
up.
weren't living in alignment with who you truly were. You were achieving and you were doing
Yeah.
things, but it just wasn't feeding you.
Yeah. And I think people fall into burnout when ambition is based on someone else's definition
Oh, yeah.
or an old definition that maybe now has changed because of where you are in your life or what you've learned. And as a result of that, I gave up my practice. I sold it. I sold all of my possessions. I left the city to start a completely new chapter in life and figure out, how can I build this world where I make money online? But most importantly, how could I build this world where I could be out in the mountains doing what I love as much as possible, and just trusting that success will fall into that rather than trying to force the success to come. So that's a personal backstory that is very
Mhm.
much led to where I am today. And I think it's something I am really, I'd almost say, sensitive to now when I see articles coming out on almost a daily basis about burnout. And then when I see solutions that are very conventional to burnout, I just disagree with pretty much all of them, because I
Mm.
feel like they're staying at the surface and not going deep on what the root cause of it is, which is something much deeper in our identity, and really needing to listen to that.
So I like that a lot. So it sounds like you said it was a personal identity crisis. Do you think there are also systematic issues at play in burnout and with the frequency and high rate of it?
Systematic meaning like what we experience in society, like things that we're
Yeah.
taught.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
I do.
capitalism in general.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I think women are really in a really interesting position with it too. I think societally, we're always taught, we're taught from a very young age to pursue, right? We kind of have these milestones mapped out in a way for us, and these very preset stages of life that we're going to be going through and experiencing. I think it's systematic as early as day one of kindergarten,
Hmm.
because we are taught to sit at the desk and obey and follow the rules and listen, and also all things that make us good as citizens and all that stuff. But
Yeah.
but in the sense of actually individuality versus conformity, I think the systematic breakdown of individuals that has
Hmm.
led to such burnout and mental health crisis is a slow erosion of who we are, and slow erosion of opportunities to really express who we are.
Hmm.
So when you find yourself, as an example, like I did, in literally the first couple months of grad school, which I knew was going to be a $150,000 investment, and knew in the first couple of months that something was not sitting right with me. I wasn't quite sure about the education. I thought maybe there's a better school, or maybe this isn't the right career choice. I was so far in.
Yeah.
So I think the systematic breakdown happens by conditioning us to conform to a preset path of milestones that are laid out for us. We are somewhat fortunate now that there's a lot more versatility in what we can do in life, but there's still a lot of baggage that comes with it. We're still taught to put a lot of attachment into our decisions. We're taught to make a lot of life based decisions very early in life before we have the emotional maturity to really recognize who we are. And then you're in it,
Hmm.
right? Then you're in the wheel. Then you're in the cog and things are starting to move. And as we go through life, it is much, much harder, I think, to dismantle and step away from things, and think for ourselves more and make changes in our life that we know we need to change, because conformity is a huge part of the picture. We're also conditioned to think about, well, if I make a change, that will make a negative impact on the people in my life, or it's seen as reckless or disruptive. It could rattle the cage, which is ironic because we're actually just kind of put in a cage to begin with early on. And I feel like it's just completely the opposite. I actually see that acting with more of a wild ambition that's more in alignment with you, that actually can have a really positive domino effect.
Oh, I
But
love that.
yeah, but we have layers, Alyssa, of guilt and shame and
Hmm.
attachment and negative thinking and fear-based thinking, and a lot of those seeds were planted very, very, very early, and then you're bombarded with similar messages on a multiple day basis, a
Hmm.
daily basis, especially the voices in our own head that have just been conditioned. So it takes a lot to turn off the noise from the outside, but most importantly, deconstruct the systematic thinking you've been told to think, so you can look and reframe your life and how to pivot in a way that is smart, in a way that benefits everyone, but most importantly, in a way that's in alignment with you and not anyone else's definition.
I love wild ambition. I think that's fantastic because
Yeah.
it is what I'm trying to do here. It's not corporate ladder climbing at all. It is a living in alignment, and it's undoing those core beliefs that are false. So how did you first tell me, like, did you have a breaking point? And then how did you undo those false beliefs that weren't actually serving you?
For some context, I did an internship when I was pursuing my doctorate overseas in New Zealand. And I was like in the pinnacle of authenticity. I was like the first person at my school to build this whole international opportunity. I went abroad to New Zealand and I lived there for 4 months, and I was able to work, and then I was able to go out and kayak and ski and hike and all of these things. And it was beautiful. And I felt so alive, and I felt so connected because I could do this work that I loved, genuinely loved at the time. And then I could live this life that I genuinely loved at the time. And I get back and I graduate and I wake up gobsmacked to the reality of how hard it was to find a job that I spent 6 months trying to find. And then I found the job, and which was in a city I never wanted to move to on the East Coast. No offense to any East Coasters listening. It's just not a vibe for a Midwestern mountain outdoor girl. It just
Yeah.
doesn't fit. And I found myself gobsmacked with the reality of a 3,000 a month stipend. And here I was thinking, I've worked years to get this doctorate. I'm a doctor and I'm getting 36,000 a year. And it was like I had just gone from the highest of highs to the lowest of lows reality checks, not realizing that there were some questions I should have asked before I ever pursued the career I pursued to begin with. And that created a lot of crumble. All of my insecurities started to come out, insecurities where I didn't feel loved and accepted and had to feel like I had to work hard to get love and acceptance, which was stuff I was taught early on from my dad, particularly.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up choosing really toxic relationships where I had to really fight to prove that I was lovable.
Mm-hmm.
And I made poor health choices, which is pretty ironic when you're alternative medicine, quote unquote, wellness doctor,
No one's
right?
immune though. That's the
No
thing.
one's immune. No one is immune. And so as the emotional baggage started to pile on, so did the weight, and so did the burnout and the mental decline. So I've gotten so far, and I actually forgot what your original question was. The breaking point.
Yeah.
So the breaking point was I had went from a life where I was living really in alignment and authentic to this reality check that eventually became really a multi-year spiral of trying to compromise myself to prove myself to the outside world that I could be loved and accepted and get the success along the way to then feel loved and accepted. But the further down that path I went, Alyssa, just the more empty I felt.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually, that emptiness became to the point where I'm crying in bed every day and just completely miserable and completely not me, but it was the me that was becoming normal and scary.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized if I'm going to change anything, or if I'm going to make a change, I cannot do it with some little pat on the back. I can't go to some quick self-help seminar or just feel good for a moment or even call a friend to get a quick pick me up. It just wasn't enough. I had to rip off all of these scabs that I had over these wounds and
Mm-hmm.
realize if I'm going to make a change, I'm going to have to make some pretty drastic changes. And for me personally, that meant changing the course of my life. Now, some people listening, as I share my story, I'm not saying that you have to change your entire life. In fact, there's probably things in your life you really, really love. But there's probably things in your life when it comes to ambition that have driven you into a hole of stress and burnout.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to figure out what needs to change and what needs to be preserved. In my case, pretty much everything needed to change. So that's when I decided I need to leave this career because I could stick with a career where I'm trying to, help others, but it was sucking the energy out of me. I had to leave the career. I had to leave where I lived. I had to leave my possessions. I had to leave the reminders that were reflecting back on me of the decisions I'd made that made me feel burned out from the chase of ambition and start completely fresh. And I knew I had to do it really fast.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't drag this out over months to a couple of years. It'd be just way too easy to be like, oh, no, 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 you're comfortable. Stay where you are. Keep doing the same thing. I had to do it fast. So in a couple months' time, 3 months, I completely changed everything and I left my career. I sold my practice, I sold my possessions, and I moved on. And it was the best decision ever because I was acting with my gut again for the first time that I
Mhm.
had in a really, really long time. And I'm not saying it was easy and I'm not saying it wasn't scary, but I did realize that feeling good was also not the goal.
Mhm.
It was purely creating it was creating a pivot, and I knew the pivot would not feel great at first. But I knew I had to trust that the reward was going to come because what I was doing wasn't working. So
Yeah.
that was the breaking point, but also light bulb at the same time.
I love that. So at that point, had you worked through some of those false beliefs, or did you then have to go and dig those out? And how did you do that?
Yeah, I think it started from the outside in, right? So I think when we're looking at, I keep thinking about ambition, right, in the context of this. I had to first look at breaking down the beliefs I was taught outside of myself, right? In my outside world. What was I taught conventionally about how to live life? And that was the first layer that gave me the courage to walk away from a career that wasn't fulfilling, walk away from a city that was sucking the sunlight out of me.
Yeah. So
And
is
I
this just
realized,
self reflection? Are you journaling? Are you doing therapy? How are you
yeah,
getting
no,
to that?
it was very much a self-reflective process. Like I'm a pretty consummate student. Like I have a here's the irony. I have a background in motivational psychology, right? When I was an undergrad, I studied how to be motivated and I studied how internal motivation is powerful. Like I worked with one of the best researchers in the field. And it wasn't something I was necessarily practicing when I was in private practice, but I realized that I had to figure out what were the things that actually motivated me again.
Hmm.
And I don't even know if I had ever asked myself that question because I think I was so focused on the external motivation, the degree,
Hmm.
the job, the income, right? All that stuff.
It's almost like an
So,
academic happiness that you were trying to
yeah,
formulate instead of connecting to the core.
yeah.
Interesting.
And and yeah, and that's a really really cool way to put it because an academic happiness is a lot of things when you think about academia. It's something you put on a piece of paper and you read and it looks really, really good and it makes a lot of sense. And it makes a lot of sense because it's what we're taught. So I had to really break down and understand if life is built on my terms, what do I want that life to look like? What do I want to have the freedom to do, the freedom to pursue? Who do I want to be?
Hmm.
And then once I understood that, then my friend, the rabbit hole opened. Then I started to look at where was the self sabotage coming from? Where was the self loathing coming from? How did I become a perfectionist? How did I become obsessed with being this high achiever, with trying to get everything right? How did I become to be the person where I would look at the mirror and criticize myself the same way every single day? And just ask myself some really honest questions and let myself answer, but not here, right?
Right.
Academic happiness is all in here, right?
She's pointing to her brain.
Yeah, I'm
That's
pointing to my
so funny.
brain. Sorry, I'm pointing to my brain. Now, but happiness is heart and gut.
Yeah.
It's never in the head, ever in the head, because your head is going to try to use quote unquote ration or logic to talk you into what you're already doing. So I had to turn off the head
Well, and it's trying
and
to
listen
keep
to
you
the gut.
safe. And it's like, you're safe here.
It
Just
is.
stay. You're safe. We're
Yeah,
not going to do the new thing that's scary. It's the neuroscience of the brain is so fascinating where it will keep us stuck in these cycles that don't actually serve us, but it's because forming neurosynapses is scary and it
it
doesn't
is
want to have to
scary.
do that. And it's like, oh, you have to be able to be willing to do that and to override that logic mind and listen to that gut. It's so hard.
It is. It is. And it's fascinating. I mean, I love that you even brought up the word synapses because I'm like such a neurology dork. I would draw cranial nerves when I was in school and love the connections and learning about like synapses and neurotransmitters and how all these circuits build. But yeah, like there is a lot of power in our brain loving the comfort of patterns, right? It's why we say the same things over and over. It's why we have the same thousands of thoughts every single day. And it can feel insurmountable to try to deconstruct all of that, which is why a lot of traditional goal setting doesn't work because you end up setting a goal And then you're giving your brain more things to think about in an already overwhelmed, overtaxed, overstressed state, but you're not getting to that wiring. You're not
Mm-hmm.
getting to that root cause where the excuses will hop in and the procrastination will show up and the stall tactics will show up to get people to keep playing it safe. It is survival in the primal sense of our brain,
Mm-hmm.
but it's conditioning in that outer cortex. Think this way, think this way, think this way, and it just becomes more reflexive. So we have to take away the automatic ways of thinking and actually retrain our brain. Luckily, we can. Luckily, our brains are very plastic and they can shape and shift, but we have to approach changing ourselves with a lot of consistency. You're not going to do it in a day or in a seminar or in a book. You have to spend weeks, if not months, and eventually a lifetime doing it, you know? And I say that in keeping it really real, right? Because as people are listening, I hope that they're thinking about their own challenges and their own patterns, but also giving yourself the grace to know that it's just about getting consistently better a little bit every day,
Yep.
too. And don't channel that academic ambition, right? That headstrong ambition into the ambition of, okay, now I want to change myself and now I'm going to change all of it and do it overnight, right? You have to temper that and bring in more consistency and discipline into it, because otherwise the brain will just become overtaxed and slip back to old patterns
Well,
again.
and like you said, like starting with that core connection, because if you're just trying to change your life to then feel different, like it doesn't work that way. Like you can't change your external actions and think that all of a sudden you're not going to have these false beliefs. You might be able to prove some things to yourself, but you're not going to do that unless you do the introspection and like and get in touch with that gut, because what does happiness even feel like? If you don't
Yeah.
know, how can you possibly just manufacture it?
Right. It's not something, yeah, it's interesting, right? Because it's something that you intuitively have to listen to, I think, almost more than you have to create. Like there are things that you have to do, right? You have to choose to think differently. I had to choose so many different habits and different ways of thinking, and I still do, like every single day. But it really comes down to understanding intuitively, what do you already know that
Mm-hmm.
you just haven't been listening to? It's interesting because, you've probably seen it. It's been out there a lot. All this research that's out there about this like steady decline in unhappiness, right? Like happens in midlife. And then eventually when you're like in your 60s or 70s, it magically gets better. And I was really frustrated by that research. And because I felt like, while it's true in the sense of it's being researched, it can set up this like self-fulfilling prophecy of
Yeah.
being completely powerless, right? Being
Mm-hmm.
completely powerless, that this is just something you have to accept. And I think there's a little bit of apathy that we're taught, maybe intentionally, maybe not, to go through life and go through the motions, to expect that we're going to hit slumps, to expect that we're going to hit a point in midlife where we're unhappy. Now, I'm not saying that life is always Pollyanna and beautiful and everything's like daisies and rainbows, right? But what I am saying is that you can also consciously choose to not fall in line with the main ideas that we're being told. Because I feel like when we see these things about people are unhappy and people are burned out, it's not about age of life and it's not about circumstances. Again, it's a call to identity. It's an
Mm-hmm.
identity crisis over and over and over again. It's because you could say, oh, it's a midlife crisis. You could say it's a quarter life crisis. You could say it's a 1/8 crisis, right? It doesn't matter. What's happening is that we're just on the off the right, we're off the path, right? We're on the wrong path, and there's a dissonance that's happening,
Mm-hmm.
and odds are it's a dissonance that we can feel. So there's this thing I talk about this concept called the pain. Let's see where we can go with this, right? It's concept called the pain. And I think about this idea where we all have these moments in life when we're on the wrong track, on the wrong path, and we see someone doing something and it makes us stop and it makes our heart hurt for a moment. And it makes us think, I wish I could do that.
Yep.
If only I could do that. If only I could live like that. And it's funny because when it comes to ambition, that gut ambition could lead with, well, how can I do that? Okay, now I'm going to listen to that. How can I pursue that? How can I make that happen? Because clearly my heart and gut are telling me, girl, you got to do this. Follow
Mhm.
that. If that's making your soul spark. But we oftentimes are so conditioned to ask the wrong questions that keep us on the wrong path.
Mhm.
I can't do that. There's no way I could do that. It would be reckless to do that. What if I fail at doing that?
Mhm.
And instead, we need to learn how to listen to those moments because those moments are some of the best clarity we can find. I had an instance where after I graduated, an old college roommate of mine became this traveling nurse, and she was posting these photos of mountaineering, and she was somewhere in like the Cascade Mountains in Washington on the peak, and you see all of these peaks in the distance. This girl's on like the top of the world and doing her thing, and here I am in a concrete jungle, and I
Mhm.
see that and my heart just sunk. And at that time, I felt so powerless in that moment, not realizing that that could have been an opportunity where my being was saying, listen to that,
Mhm.
follow that, ask yourself how you can do that, figure that out. Use your ambitious nature to figure that out
Mhm.
rather than just stay stuck and compliant and attached to ambition.
Mhm.
Attached to an ambition that wasn't actually serving me, maybe ever, but certainly not at that point.
Mhm.
So I'm not quite sure where I'm going with it, but it made me think of that thing with the pain because I think it's really important that we reconnect to those micro moments where we're actually being shown that we're not on the right path.
Mhm.
And if we don't pursue them, that's going to close and more time is going to pass. And hopefully another one will come along. So we have to listen to that. We have to get more connected to that. I realized genuinely, like I got really addicted to wanting to find that love outside of myself.
Yeah, it is
And
addictive, isn't it?
it's very
It really
addictive and
is.
it's very, very toxic because you realize that even down to some of the simplest things in your day-to-day life, you have to really ask, am I doing this for me or am I doing this for someone else?
Mhm.
Right? Am I doing this because someone else likes to do this? Because someone else thinks this would make the most sense for me? Or am I doing this for me? And it was crazy, Alyssa, because I realized so many things in my life I was doing because I thought it was the right thing
Mhm.
or the best thing. And then I would make a phone call to someone to show how great I was and then be cut off at the knees with some insult or being disregarded. So for women who are dealing with this, it's like a universal language, I think, for a lot of us, right, who've experienced this. I have found I was able to take the power away from that, not so much by just recognizing it as a pattern, that was a really powerful first step. I had to actually figure out, where did this actually start?
Mhm.
When was I taught to not trust within myself, right? When was I taught to have to prove myself that I was worthy to be loved? When was I taught to prove that I had to get everything right and perfect in order to get praise or accolades or attention, right? And the further I went back into that rabbit hole and I looked back into my 20s and then my teens and then very, very young as a little girl, there were a lot of scars there, a lot of moments that really made an imprint on moments when I should have been supported and I wasn't, moments when I shouldn't have needed to have worked or proved so hard. And there's no blame game in this, right? There's no like pointing fingers to anyone, but you realize that when you realize that someone just taught you to think this way, or someone just modeled a behavior, and maybe that person brought their own head trash
Yeah.
and their own insecurities, I realized two things. One, I realized it wasn't mine. I
Mhm.
realized none of it was mine. None of
Okay,
it.
I've
It was
totally
just,
had that
yeah,
realization. This is not mine. I do not need to carry
yeah,
this. I don't like I'm
yes,
going to set this down and walk away. And it's like,
yes.
whoa.
Oh, right. You feel like the heavens have opened, right? Or like
Uh-huh.
20 pounds of baggage have just fallen off of you because you realize you were giving these things outside of you so much unnecessary power. And that was the first part that was really, really healing, to be able to give myself the grace to go that deep, that far back, and recognize that it wasn't something I had to hold on to because it actually wasn't me. It's just who I was taught to be.
Mhm.
And the second thing was interesting too, because along the way, you realize you could hold on to anger misguided ambition, desire to prove yourself or feel loved, there's another person on the other side of that equation, right? There's a recipient, a conduit, maybe someone who's causing you, you think, to act a certain way. And then I realized that there's another perspective to look at it. I alluded to it just a minute ago. Everyone is bringing their own stuff to the table, right? Everyone's bringing their own baggage, their own projections, their own ways that they were taught. For a lot of people, they're just used to being that. And all of a sudden, I was gifted with a lot more empathy. I
Mm-hmm.
was gifted with a lot more empathy to a father who was really just entrenched in his own head. I was able to have a lot more empathy towards toxic men that I had been in relationships with, big alpha personalities that wouldn't give me the time of day, but I would give them anything for a crumb.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden I felt what I wanted to make sure is that as I was letting go of the power of patterns that weren't serving me, I wasn't building up walls to
Mm-hmm.
hide myself and insulate myself from the world. And when that empathy showed up, I realized everyone's just trying to figure their shit out, you
Yep.
know?
Yep.
And no one's really trying to do intentional harm, right? Very, very few people try to do intentional harm on others. I just found myself approaching things with a lot more grace and a lot less anger, because there was a long time I had anger and bitterness too that I was
Mm-hmm.
working through, right? And so yeah, so as I share all of that, it's really important that as we look back and understand, once we get that clarity, that it doesn't get replaced with anger,
Mm-hmm.
or bitterness or resentment, or trying to point fingers and blame. No, it actually has an opportunity to open up doors for grace and empathy and forgiveness,
Mm-hmm.
because ultimately that's still going to benefit you most of all anyways,
Yeah.
and that emotional baggage that we've carried for just far too long.
Well, and I think part of that is having the hope to know you're not ruined for life. Like there, you can get out of this, and you can put all that energy into being resentful and angry and bitter and trying to point fingers. Or everyone has their stuff, everyone's doing the best they can. They're trying to survive with the skills that they've been taught. I'm going to
Yeah.
use my energy to learn to go a better way and to not use my energy in ways that are just going to drain me, and go create something that I really love and that's actually going to feed and nourish me. And then that empathy, for me in my experience, just kind of ramps up. It's not an excuse, it's an explanation, and I can move on.
Yeah, it is. It's very liberating. And I think there's something to be said about having a foundation to hold your frame always.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that I think sometimes I'm speaking generally here, but I think it's safe to say that as women, because we tend to be very communal based and nurturing and empathetic and compassionate, sometimes that can get misconstrued as being amiable
Mm-hmm.
and taking in other people's ideas, maybe too easily, or taking in other people's opinions, and letting that influence and shapeshift who we are. You know, when I was sharing with people early on, not too early on, a couple years ago, when I had the goal of doing the 7 summits. So the 7 summits are the highest 7 mountains in the planet. It
Mm-hmm.
requires a lot of skills and a lot of training. There were some people in my life that I shared, people who've been in my life for a very, very long time, who would just look at me with these really confused, bewildered eyes, like, why? Why would you do that? Like, it makes no sense. And when we are so focused with ambition projected on the outside of proving ourselves, it's so easy to adopt other people's frames and perspectives of the world. And in those little micro moments, that can pivot us completely off. It can take our own internal ambition away to pursue what we really want, to fall it back in line, or be like, oh, I'm going to adopt their perspective on it.
So I've
But
had
it's
those
interesting.
experiences too, and it's just
Yes.
like an energy suck, like almost immediately.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how do you deal with that? Do you not talk to those people, or how do you approach that?
Yeah, it's tricky. I realized there's a couple of things. I've definitely been very protective of who are the people in my life that are leaking energy and
Yeah.
have created some space. I've also been very mindful to look within myself and ask, what am I expecting of these people?
Yeah.
And I've realized that if I'm setting really high expectations that these people are, one, going to know every single core of my being, or two, evolve with me at the same pace, it's actually unfair to them.
Mm-hmm.
So part of what helped me is, look, there are people in our life who are constants no matter what, right? Unless we're going to take a aggressive and non-recommended approach to obliterate exonerate everyone from our life. There are people like family, like
Yeah.
long-term friends that are in our life. And unless they're toxic, they're going to be in our life, right? But people who don't understand you, I don't say they're toxic. They just don't understand you.
Yeah.
So I recognize part of what helped is to actually think about those people in my life that have been like the Death Eater, right? Like sucking the energy out of me in
Perfect
those
example.
moments. Yeah, I'm trying to like do the voice like right? Where
Yeah.
it's like pulling the energy out of you. It's I realized that if I took a step back and I looked at each of those people, I actually asked myself, what does each of these people bring to my life, right? What what do I get from that person?
So like
As
a
a
step back, like a bigger picture of the whole of
yeah.
them, not just this moment where they don't necessarily pump you up the way you want.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. And then I recognized there are some people that provide stability from a sense of history. I've known them from a long time. There are
Hmm.
some people that provide great experiences and laughter, but maybe they don't provide really deep, stimulating conversation. But what I stopped doing is I stopped putting expectations on people.
Hmm.
Expectations, I think, is where our ambition can get into trouble.
Hmm.
Because if we're always having these expectations of who people are going to be, how they're going to show up, how they're going to react, how things are going to go for us when we're pursuing a goal, you're going to be disappointed no matter what. Like the expectations will never happen. So you really have to first look at these people in your life and think about, okay, what do these people bring? Because more often than not, there's going to be one or two really powerful qualities that each of these people bring. And when you piece all of them together around you, you realize it's a pretty whole picture.
Hmm.
And it is also very important that you are in a continual quest to manifest brothers and sisters in your world that are on a similar journey as you. And it doesn't mean a similar journey as, oh, I just hang out with mountaineers, but it's people who are on a similar journey to change and to shift and to connect and to understand on a deeper level and to question and to challenge things, right? You have to also keep evolving too. Because I do think when you have these people who have been your core, the people that you've known the longest in your life, they can still be the people you most easily go to for validation. And that's a slippery slope.
Hmm.
So you got to stop seeking validation from others, but also don't block yourself off and still look at what they bring to your life. And that again is where peace can come in and just take some of the emotion out of it to
Hmm.
give you a clearer heart and just keep listening. Make sure that you know you're on the right track no matter how anyone else shows up in your life. And that means anyone, even your partner.
Values are going to be different, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that they're bad or wrong. It's just we're all slightly different.
Absolutely. And I'll tie this into goals as we're somewhat foreshadowing into the segment of relationships you're going to be focusing on. But like it's interesting. My husband and I have had a lot of conversations revolving my ambitions around mountaineering. We've talked a lot about Everest. Everest is a 3-month commitment. It's deadly, like it's scary. It holds a lot of risk. As do a lot of things. I just happen to choose a sport that happens to involve a little bit more inherent risk than like badminton, you know? But we've had a lot of conversations, and there was a time that he felt uncertain. We both felt uncertain because our interests were different,
Hmm.
and we realized that was actually a very surface level way to look at a relationship because in the end, we also recognize that no matter what the person wanted to pursue individually, we've always have each other's back, right? And how can we support that person to do what they want to go after? And it's from a lot of conversations and clarity, we've actually recognized that he is the stability piece of our relationship and I'm the adventure piece of our relationship. And there's always this beautiful balance. But if
Saying.
both of us were like, right, really adventurous, there's not a yin yang. Like there's a
Hmm.
balance, right? There's a balance of energies that when it works in a relationship and when you're in tune to it, rather than see it as a difference, you see it as a balance.
Yeah,
So
it's a
we
superpower.
now it is. So we now lovingly are in this place where it's like he actually says like I'm your Sherpa. So when you're getting ready to do an expedition, I'm going to make sure that you're packed, that you're ready to go, that all the logistics are in place, that you have everything that you need both before, during, and after. And it's wonderful
Hmm.
to have that. And we've actually grown closer together because we're more in tune to who we are individually. But what's really interesting is it took a lot of conversation and self-awareness to get there to see that it wasn't differences. It was actually just different energies that complemented. But what's interesting is this is that when it comes to goals, and I say this particularly for women with ambitious goals, sometimes it is really difficult for us to think about putting those goals as a top priority in our life. We
Hmm.
get very concerned that we'll be seen as selfish or We feel guilty by putting ourselves first. And it's not just women, right? But I think that as it relates to this conversation, women can feel guilt or feel bad by taking time away from other things in their life and other loved ones or other obligations. And it's very natural to feel like that, being just inherently these nurturing creatures on this planet.
Mhm.
But the thing I say is this, if you have an ambitious goal that you've been struggling to pursue because of those reasons, what I would invite you to ask yourself instead is, how is my playing it safe? How is my compromising impacting the people in my life?
Mhm.
I actually think that one of the most selfish things we can do is to not pursue that deeper thing that's inside us. And I say selfish from a wake up call, not from a judgment. I
Mhm.
say it this way because if we are holding back on ourselves, if we are playing it safe, eventually that burnout, feeling checked out, feeling stressed, passive aggressive, maybe emotions are more easily triggered, right? It's going to manifest in some way, right? It's just
Mhm.
like bubbling under the surface all the time. And the people in our life will face those ramifications in some way. It
Mhm.
could be getting over petty arguments about day to day things that don't matter. It could be
Mhm.
getting distracted and a little bit checked out when spending time with people that we love. It could be just being disconnected and not
Yeah.
leading by the example that we're trying to teach and model. So I say this with a lot of compassion and empathy that if you are struggling with that guilt and shame, think about instead, what does that look like if you actually don't pursue that, right? What are the people in your life missing out on
Mhm.
by you not living authentic to that deeper ambition,
Well,
by
I
you
think
not pursuing that thing?
we use a lot of our energy to try and manage that constantly.
Yeah.
You could show up as your whole self and be much more present if you were living the rest of your life in a way that was working for you.
Oh my gosh. Yes, it's amazing, right? Because you really think about how the negative thoughts can really take moments from your life, if not
Mhm.
a lot of presence from your life. And you realize, like, to what extent do you want to play, not only playing it safe, but being checked out? And I think for a lot of people, it's really easy to not create urgency towards our goals because it's easy to justify the things in our life not rattling the cage, right?
Mhm.
Not upsetting things, not being different, and and being too afraid to pursue something different. But we have to look at, I use this phrase, consciously compromising. Where are we consciously compromising on ourselves every single day by spending unnecessary energy on being critical of ourselves or being overly negative towards ourselves? And that the only thing that's doing for us, it's doing something, it's keeping us safe, but it's not benefiting us at all. And it's a process to undo all of that. But if you find yourself in a position where a lot of the things outside of you are dictating what you're doing or not, then you actually have to look at, well, how are the people in your life suffering as a result
Mhm.
of that? And that, I find, can be one of the greatest wake up calls to create a different change, because you want to show up 100% for the people in your life. But
Mhm.
if you can show up 100% for yourself first, that domino effect will naturally happen rather than you trying to prove yourself. It actually builds your energy back up rather than taking more out of you. And that is way more sustainable than trying to pursue someone else's definition of what your life should be.
Absolutely. I love that. We talked a little bit at the beginning before we started recording about taking action and how that also builds energy. Can you speak a
Yeah.
little bit to that and maybe tell us? I don't think we actually heard the full picture of
Mm.
what your life looks like now. And we heard the change part. Tell us what it's
Yeah.
like now. And then that energy just kind of ramps up.
Yeah. Well, so it was interesting because after I decided, just a quick backstory, after I decided to leave my practice and sell all my possessions, that one really big action started to create momentum where all of a sudden I transformed my life, where I have a home full time in the mountains in Utah, where I can go hiking multiple times a week, where I spend a lot of my time in the outdoors. But also in turn, I've created this world that's very fluid. So the way that I work and the way that I live are now very, very similar. Pretty much everything in my life comes down to some type of expedition. So in my own working journey, purpose-driven journey. I've realized that I've always wanted to help people get to the root cause of what's going on. And that transformed from working on physical ailments in my private practice to looking at people and their deeper identity blocks, their mental blocks, their emotional blocks. And I like hacking my way through their barriers to help them get to who they really are. And in turn, in my own life, I go on my own journeys and my own expeditions where I'm continually working on conquering myself by pushing new limits and thinking about new summits and new hiking circuits I can do. But at the same time, I do the same exact thing in the work in my own world, in my own business. So as a coach, one of the biggest things I do and offer is my program expedition. I actually take my clients on an expedition. I'm not going to throw you in the Himalayas. We do it virtually, but we start at base camp, in essence, where you are now. And where are you stuck? And what needs to change? And what needs to shift? And then we look at what is that summit for you? What is it that you want to be? And what do you want to accomplish? And what do we need to do to get there to take down the emotional baggage that's holding you back, to get you to trust in yourself again, to get you to understand who you really are inside, to figure out what obstacles could get in your way and build self-reliance and emotional control. And it's a personal transformation journey I take my clients on. And it very much reflects the journey that I have in my life when I'm not coaching. When I'm out on a mountain, it's a transformational journey every single time. Every summit's different. Every adventure is different. Some days I feel in the flow and easy, and other days I feel like I am just slogging it with 50 pounds of baggage on me. And that's okay because it's part of the journey. But I found myself that once I started to take that one action to just know that I had to make a change, that one action became another and another and another. And before I knew it, I went from being this city dweller, pretty inactive, you know, like overweight, depressed, like I didn't have a lot going on, to all of a sudden becoming this person that could do a 100-mile hiking circuit or could do a mountain marathon on a whim. That's actually something I wanted to challenge myself on. This was a couple years ago. I have found myself now being able to trust myself way more to just see if I could do something. And not even see if I could do it, just know I could do it. So I had come out of this 100-mile, 150-mile hiking circuit in Canada. I get back to my home in Utah and I see a sign for a mountain marathon. And I hate running. I don't run at all. I've never done a marathon. The closest I've done is like a 5K in mud with obstacles and a beer waiting at the end. And I thought, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to do it. And it was 2 weeks away. Complete madness. Like by any logical conventional means, people would say, oh yeah, there's no way you could run a marathon. And I did it painfully and sluggishly, but I did it. I did 26 miles of running in a day. And that all happened because of a culmination of decisions and actions that created momentum to believe that I could be this person that is an athlete. I could be this person that excels in the mountains. And I could be this person that helps people figure it out the same way, but save a lot more time and not waste as much time as I did figuring it out. So I love the world I'm in now because rather than feeling like my world is compartmentalized where I'm working one time and then I'm adventuring over here, everything's very synonymous. Everything about my life is an expedition. Everything about my life is a journey. Everything about my life is what's the next thing I can conquer. And I say conquer delicately, right? Because I don't want it to sound like it's like, oh, I'm pushing and I'm hustling and grinding, but it is like an ascension. What's the next level? What's the next thing? What's the next thing? And really embracing that journey along the way. So it's very homogenous now, and it's a world I've built, and especially the past couple of years where a lot of things can feel out of our control. I've learned that we have to build our own world. We
Mhm.
have to build our own bubble, and who we are in one part of life should really mirror who we are in others, rather than it feeling disjointed, because then everything else can fall really fluidly when we show up the same way in all facets of our life.
We have this idea what a goal looks like. And I shared my whole goal setting process earlier this month. It's very intense, but
Yeah.
I use my values to make sure that what I'm doing, I'm living the way I want to live now and also achieving. So I'm wondering what you can add to that conversation and
Yeah.
how do we even go about doing that?
I've tried a lot of goal setting in my life,
Yeah.
and I've had a pretty toxic relationship with goals up until recently, because I found that I would set goals Sometimes I would achieve them, and sometimes I wouldn't. When I would achieve them, I'd feel good for a moment, then I'd look to the next goal. And when
Mhm.
I wouldn't achieve them, I'd beat myself up and feel like a failure. So I do set goals, but I set goals in a really different way. And honestly, the past couple years has been really helpful for that because a lot of my goals involve travel. A
Mhm.
lot of my goals involve going to remote quarters of the world. They involve
Hasn't
very
been such an
specific.
option recently, has it?
Not so much. No, no, right? Where yeah, travel has been fraught with a lot more obstacles now. And if I were to look at that from a traditional goal setting lens, where let's say it's goals in the sense of here are a list of the things I want to accomplish,
I'm going
that
to Thailand. Oh wait, I
yes,
failed at that.
right. I'm going to Nepal. Oh, wait, I need to quarantine. Do I want to quarantine in Kathmandu? Right. All of
Yeah.
these questions, new questions, right? And if I had looked at it from a very traditional goal setting, bucket list, cross things off, the more I do, the more successful and the more important I feel because I've done all this cool stuff. It just would not have worked. It would have been very, very crumbling. And then I realized that underneath that goal, that specific location or thing, was what was the general experience I was going after? What was the general feeling I wanted to have in the pursuit of Nepal, the Annapurna circuit, or going to do the trek in Patagonia? I realized that the feeling, the experience was more important than the specific goal.
Mhm.
And then I figured out how can I create more of that consistently in my life? So if I were to use an example of like a hiking circuit, and I can't necessarily hike as easily in Patagonia or Annapurna or France, what I do know is that I love the feeling of putting on my backpack. I love the feeling of packing it. I love the feeling of knowing that's the only thing and everything that's in there is what I'm going to rely on for the next several days. I love being outside. I love being in the quiet. I love being surrounded by the elements. I love being reliant on myself. So all of a sudden, Alyssa, I started to realize that there were characteristics underneath the goal that
Mhm.
created a feeling within me
Yeah.
and an experience within me. And that it wasn't so much about achieving something, but it was about how could I live more into that feeling consistently rather than going after that one thing. So in my own process where I talk about how to transform yourself in like 60-day chunks and 90-day chunks, I talk about needle movers. Like, what are the things that you can do? I realized that it wasn't okay, between now and in 8 weeks, I'm going to achieve this one thing. It was, what are the things that I can do daily, weekly, monthly to live into that? And all of a sudden, my attachment to achieving that one thing, though it's still out there, right? I want to do the 7 summits. I have a list of like 30 hiking circuits I want to do. But I know that if I can live more into the experiences consistently, I can train with my backpack on. I can do trails in the area where I live. I can do multiple things domestically and shift it. So I'm not so attached to the specific goal, but I'm attached to the experience and characteristics of that goal.
Mm.
Once I figured that out, then I realized it was more about living into that experience than necessarily achieving one thing. So now I can put on my pack multiple times a week and I can train at the gym and do it. I can do hikes and do it. I could do road trips and do it. All of a sudden, not being so attached to this one thing gave me this like avalanche of all these other ways that I could experience it more consistently rather than waiting to achieve the outcome. And while I still have these destinations I want to go to and hopefully timelines at what I could do it, it's given me a lot more grace to actually not be so attached to the one thing, but actually be more attached to how can I consciously choose to just be that thing and live more like that every day. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Oh, absolutely. I
Yeah.
think you're the first person I've talked to or that I've like been aware of that actually kind of marries both of those ideas because I've been trying to do that where like who do I want to be? How do I want to feel? What does my life want to be like? And I create like a vision board. And then what are things right now I can think of these steps to help me get there, but life happens, pandemics happen, things happen
Yeah.
where the steps that I set out to take the path, takes a different direction and it is really easy to feel like a failure if that and if those steps are the goal, but if the feeling's the goal, you can get there so many different ways.
Yeah.
It's really interesting and it's scary to me I think because it feels intangible. it's it's like I don't know. I can't like write down the exact path that I know I'm going to take, but
Yeah.
I'm still dedicated to getting to that place of feeling that way and having that life. And it's a little terrifying, but I still do it.
Yeah.
Still work.
Yeah, no, totally. No, I mean, it's funny because I think that, especially in light with like all things COVID, right? It can make people feel really powerless. I mean, when it just started, my husband and I were on in the middle of a year-round trip around the world. We had just spent 6 months in Australia and New Zealand, and our next step was to go to Nepal. I was going to do the Annapurna circuit. I was like, yes, it's like all lining up. And then obviously everything happened. And there have been times in the past couple of years where I could feel the slippery slope of feeling completely disempowered, mildly terrified, and could fall into a really depressed state thinking about, oh my god, what if this never goes away? Oh my god, what if this gets worse? Oh my god, what if the restrictions pile up? And that could feel really suffocating. And I found myself actually though kind of experimenting, being like, okay, if I thought that, if I fell down that thought pattern, okay, how would I show up? How would I see the world? How
Mhm.
would I show up day to day? How limited would I feel? And I just kind of stepped out of myself and asked without emotion, okay, if this is something I'm terrified of feeling, well, let's play it out. How would I show up? And it was actually really liberating, Alyssa, because I actually realized, oh, I'm just consciously choosing this perspective and not giving it power by just observing it.
Mhm.
So I realized too that we have to be really mindful that our goals don't take power away from us, right? If we are setting goals and something happens, right, or we fail in the pursuit of it, and that takes away our power, we've missed the whole point of setting the goal to begin with.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Because yeah, the pure act of setting out to do something in some ways should be enough because you've already made the decision to be a different person and to act differently. So you're already in alignment with a higher version of yourself. And you have to be mindful of like, where is my power coming from? Right. We cannot rely on feeling a sense of power and command and control by waiting for things to line up in the outside world. We have to build that internal power within ourselves. That's why I talk about this concept called the summit window. I talk about it in coaching and in my book and stuff. And it's this whole idea that in the mountains, hopefully your listeners love all these mountain analogies because it is the
Yep.
world that I live in. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's so fun.
Same.
I love it, right? So in the mountain world, there are summit windows, meaning on some of the highest peaks, like 8,000 meters and above, or like 24,000 feet and higher, you have maybe a couple of windows in a couple of days in a climbing season to climb it. And that's because of the weather and the currents and making sure that the conditions are just right in hopes that you will be able to get to the top, and hopefully everything else falls in line. Hopefully no one gets altitude sickness or falls, or there's an equipment failure, or another team has an issue. There's a whole host of things that can go wrong. And what I
Mhm.
love about the mountains is there are so many things that could go wrong. It could be disastrous, but you keep going because you know why you're there, and you know why you want to pursue it, because you're chasing that feeling of what it feels like to be able to accomplish something that most people told you that you can. But you cannot miss your summit window.
Mm.
So when we talk about goals and setting goals and timelines for goals and steps to achieve goals, I always ask people to think about the summit window, meaning you have a very, very short window of time to pursue that goal. And I'm not saying because of circumstances in the outside world. I'm not saying because the stars have magically aligned that all of a sudden now's your time to do it. It's different than on a mountain. You have to create your summit window,
Mhm.
because if you realize that you have a wake up call in your life, or there's something that you so deeply want to do that it's calling at your soul, or there's areas in your life that are suffering because you're compromising, and you have this moment of a wake up call, that's when your summit window starts, because that wake up call will never feel as real. The emotions will never feel as raw. The desire will never feel as deep as it does in that moment when you feel that enlightenment, or that moment of almost like disbelief that you need to do something different.
Mhm.
If I would not have acted on the desire to leave my practice and leave that life, I would have missed that window because eventually the same thought patterns would have come into play. The same excuses would have come into play. Someone else's opinions would have come into play, and that window would be gone. And who knows when it would open up again. So, for people who are listening, goal setting doesn't work when we only focus on the how and not the who.
Mm-hmm.
And goal setting doesn't work when we end up not taking our own command over how we can make it happen. You cannot miss your summit window. So if you are listening and your soul is screaming at you because some part of you needs to break free or you need to pursue something, it will not feel this raw and real again until maybe some point down the road where you hear an interview or read a different book or something else or someone else comes into your world. And that is where you can find urgency. That's where you can find your power. Because I can't tell your listeners, well, time is precious and no time like the present. We know this,
Yeah.
but it doesn't work because we don't feel the pain of it. And typically, we don't feel the pain of needing to make change unless we're faced with a consequence or a circumstance that takes our power away. But you can tap into that urgency when you realize that what you're feeling right now will never feel this raw again for a long time. That your soul is trying to give you the urgency that you need, and no one's going to give it to you. You better have a coach or a guide along the way to help you keep that fire going, but no one in convention, no one in society is going to give that to you. You have to cultivate that within yourself. And when you do that, that's where your power comes. That's when the achievement is just the cherry. That's when the summit is just a consequence of all the awesome things you've done to get there. But that's where you find your power.
I love
And
that.
then it's
Thank
just,
you.
yeah.
I visualize this like little like match being lit in my chest and how it's like I can either just let it burn out or I can fuel it and like grow and let that energize me and push me and take me to that next level. Because once it's blown out, you can try and relight it, but oh my gosh, it takes so much more work. And when
Yeah.
you're already exhausted and you're already living a life that doesn't align with that, like it's hard to get that back. You just got to like hit it and go.
You got to go. And we talked about this a little bit before, right? You got to follow those impulses, right? When you have these little impulses of inspiration to do something, then pursue it. Experiment with that feeling, right? It could be something as simple as I feel like I should go here today, or I feel like I should talk to this person today. Follow those impulses. Like I think ambition starts with intuition. Every
Mhm.
single time. Your intuition will never ever lead you astray. But if you ignore it, sometimes you could get so far off path, you don't even recognize who you are. And I will say this, speaking of fire, because I love that analogy. I do some self-study on like chakras and opening chakras, right? And all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I love it. Like the solar plexus, like where your center is, right? I love thinking about that stuff, or like the little fire in your heart, right?
Mhm.
I think about, and I would advise people listening to watch out for the candle snuffers in your life. Watch out for the people that try to take that flame out, that try to keep you playing it small, that try to keep you playing it safe. And again, it may not be for a poor, an ill reason, right? They may not be
Right.
trying to do anything
That's
to
just
hold
what
you
feels
back.
safe to them, or they're trying to keep you
Yeah.
safe.
Yeah, but you have to keep that fire stoked all the time. And that's why, like, part of my own process with setting goals and a process that I teach is I talk all the time about needle movers. I talk all the time about what are the things that you can do that will move the needle in the right direction. I think it's so easy sometimes in really traditional goal setting or just productivity in general, which I actually hate that word because it's all about like to-do lists and get more done in less time. And when you get more done in less time, that free time you've just built, put more stuff to do in that,
Yeah.
right?
It just kind of,
So
yeah,
it's
goes
just a
downhill.
compound effect. So as people are pursuing a goal, you have to really ask yourself what you're doing in the pursuit of that goal. Is it moving the needle?
Hmm.
Is it getting you further in the direction of that goal? Or are you doing stuff, going through the motions, thinking that by just doing stuff, it's going to like somehow help? You have to be really conscious of this process. So, like, as an example, when I left my private practice, one of my needle movers, I had to consciously talk to my patients, whom some of whom I treated for almost a decade, to
Hmm.
tell them about this transition. But I knew I needed to do that to be able to um, gracefully exit out of my practice and make sure that they were in good hands.
Hmm.
had I not done that, it would have been much harder to have even gone after that to begin with, because I could have felt ashamed, embarrassed, ill prepared. I'd procrastinated. So you have to really think about, like, if you have a goal you're setting down the road in another weeks to a couple months out, ideally no more than a couple months out, like, what are you doing every single day, week, and month to move the needle?
Mm-hmm.
Is it moving the needle, or is it just something that I'm doing? Like, it has to be intentional action too. So it's a good way to keep yourself on track, but also not burn out in the pursuit of the goal. So you can make sure that what you're doing is truly going to give you momentum,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to just filling up your day with stuff in days that are already way too filled.
Yeah, I love that. I have an example of this.
Yeah.
I grabbed my journal real quick. In episode 1 of season 3, so two episodes before this, I talk about my goal setting process, which we've referenced a little bit. But one of the big dreams that I really wanted, and I didn't know how to make this happen, but one of those things was I wanted more examples of strong women who are contributing to the world in my life. I wanted to pursue my passions and be awesome. That's like what I have written down in my journal. And it wasn't till 3 weeks later that I had the idea to begin this podcast. And it was like this thing that I wanted to manifest, but I didn't know how. And then I had this idea, start the podcast. You get to, find awesome women that I don't know. I can't take them to lunch. I can't take them to coffee right now. I can invite them on a podcast, and then I can
Yeah.
share that. I can start contributing to the world in a concrete way. I can start emulating the things I admire and like becoming the person I wanted to admire. But I didn't know that when I found that that's what I needed in my life. I didn't know how it was going to happen.
Mm,
But
yeah.
I didn't like try and like make something up to get there. I was very introspective, and then this thing came into my life, came into this idea, and like we talked about at the beginning, like 3 days later, I was scheduling people, and I had the podcast name, and I was moving forward on it, um and I gained that momentum because I was set up to take action. And I knew what the values were, and I knew where I wanted to go, and like, oh, I can ride this to get to that place. And
Yeah.
it's not about the podcast even. This is about who I'm becoming in this process, and it's awesome. And I've been going for a year now because it's creating the energy, it's helping me become the person that I want to become.
Yeah, that's so cool, isn't it? Because you realize, like, when you follow that impulse, sometimes, like, the podcast, in a way, not that it's a side effect, right? But there's like so many other players, right? There's so many
Mhm.
other benefits to that process, all because you took a moment to just sit and get real quiet, right? With what a feeling that had come to you. It makes me think of this. There's a woman, Marissa Peer. She's a hypnotherapist, and she's got some really cool meditations out there. And it was about a year ago. Um, not quite to the day, more like 10 months ago, where I was listening to one of her meditations about clarity, because I was figuring out, like, okay, I want to build a program, and I want to build a program to help people, but I don't want it to be like so many of the self-help programs out there. I wanted it to be like, feel different and be different. And so in this meditation, she has you put your finger on your third chakra, right between your eyebrows, and you focus on the phrase narrow down. And you just keep saying this phrase, narrow down. And you're telling your mind, just narrow down. And what's the most important thing? What's the most exciting thing? What is the thing that you want to put your energy and your heart into? And Alyssa, I swear to you, after finishing that meditation, it was like this portal opened and all of these ideas came flooding into me. It was what birthed my expedition program, where, like, I coach my clients going through this, like, virtual journey from their own base camp to their summit, and taking them through these stages of personal transformation and creating this world where, like, everything just all of a sudden started to click into place. But it only happened when I just gave myself the opportunity to get quiet, and that can be a really hard thing for people to do, especially when we're ambitious souls and we're constantly thinking about things we want to pursue and do, and what's the next task or what's the next thing to check off. Sometimes the biggest ambition comes when you actually don't think at all,
Mhm.
and you just let it come to you,
Mhm.
and you just allow it in. And I think in society, we're so taught to hustle and grind and force and push and just keep going. But I feel like you and I have both had these moments now where the more you just sit back and allow it, like, that, it's a different kind of ambition, because
Mhm. It
it's just,
totally is.
it's fluid and it's easy and you're not trying to force it. It just allows it. Same thing. Like I had thought about like the start of this year, really wanting to cultivate a sisterhood and bringing people who think on a similar level into my life. And all of a sudden, I'm in this podcast group and I'm messaging people, and you and I connect, and it's just easy, right? So I feel like when your ambition is misguided, it's difficult. When your ambition is in flow, it's easy. And that's
Hmm.
probably the simplest barometer to determine whether you are on the, I don't want to say right, quote unquote, right path, but it is when you're on the right path, right?
Yeah.
Is it difficult or is it easy? And it doesn't mean that when you're on the easy path, you're not going to face challenges, obviously, but intuitively, like
Yeah.
in inside of yourself, does it feel easy? Does it feel fun? Does it feel purposeful? Does it feel joyous? And if it doesn't, whether it's a career, a relationship, a location, if it feels like you're constantly hitting this brick wall, pause, narrow down, think about what needs to shift. And boy, ambition feels a lot more fun when you do it like that.
It does. And
Yeah.
my response to that is letting go of control. Like you're still guiding, you're still steering your ship, but I don't know. There's something in what I've been taught about achievement that's very much like you have to be in complete control. And a lot of this is kind of letting it go and then somehow still finding the way and still things work together. And it's
Mm.
again, that's scary to even talk about because these women who are listening are a lot of type A people and we like to make it happen.
Yeah, we do. No, we do. And I think it's fascinating how control can show up in so many ways. And I have a story that perhaps will help. I went through this kind of weird journey with flying. I used to like really, really love flying. And then I had this experience on a flight where we flew around these thunderstorms, and it was just awful turbulence for a couple of hours. I mean, it was pretty crumbling. It wasn't fun. You know, planes doing that up and down, dropping and stuff. It wasn't great. Even though it's like, you're safe, but you think about worst case scenario. And
Mm-hmm.
for a long time after that, I would feel my entire body just clench, and I would get these fits of almost panic and anxiety when I would feel turbulence on flights. And I finally, I don't know how I came across this metaphor. It might have been in another meditation. I can't remember where the source was, but it was this idea. I think I was listening to a pilot talking about turbulence, and it was this idea that when a plane is going over turbulence, it's kind of like when a river goes over rocks, right? If you were to just look at the river, the water is just flowing gently downstream. It's always just going downstream, always. And there's little rocks along the way. But if you're not focusing on every single rock, it's just flow. It's just
Mm-hmm.
going downstream. It's always going in the direction it's supposed to be. And if you're, however, you're trying to like focus on every single rock, it's like, oh God, there's a bump. Oh God, there's a bump. Oh God, there's a bump, right? And you're panicking because you're facing something that you can't control. And you feel like you can't control it. But you can control the perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So I experimented with that on a flight shortly after hearing that. And there were some bumps started to happen. And I was picturing myself as the river, just going over these rocks, but I'm just flowing to that destination. And it was oddly really peaceful to realize that I actually was much safer than I'd ever felt being up there, experiencing those sensations. And I think sometimes when ambitious women hear to let go of control, right? To not try to force things to happen. If that's difficult, then I would invite you to think about focusing on what you actually can control. Because
Mm-hmm.
you can't control the circumstances, but how cool if you can control the perspective.
Yeah.
How cool if you can control, right, what you choose to think and how you look at something, and being able to shape shift that. Because that I actually find is where I've gotten my most sense of internal power beyond anything else, is not controlling an outcome or an expectation about someone or how I'm going to show up. But there's a lot of things I can control. I can control
Yeah.
what I'm choosing to do every day. I can control how I'm choosing to look at things. And that I think is really helpful, because it can be a really hard switch to go from I'm type A and I'm gonna like do absolutely everything at once to I'm just gonna be in the zone, man. I'm just gonna go into flow and let things happen. I think control is still something we should seek. I
So
just think we need to guide it a different way.
I think that's really true. I think I take back what I said earlier because like you said, ambition isn't the problem. It's getting it correctly aligned for you. Control isn't the problem. It's the misapplication of it to try and have an experience. And we can still value those things and it's that perspective shift that then it's like, "Oh, I'm actually okay how I am. This is how I'm going to function in the world." And
Yeah.
so freeing. I love it.
Well, you realize how it just gets mirrored back to you when you're trying to force things to happen. And we talked about this on the relationship stuff, even. I think this is important to bring back up when we try to control like how people love us or the attention they give to us by how hard we work to get that, right? And then you realize in so many facets of life, like if you're trying to control weight loss and control how your body looks and control your income, like you're actually just putting a really forceful energy out there, right? And it is an energetic thing. Like I really believe that it is, because I was just thinking about this. I was thinking about like another analogy in my head. I was thinking about like in school, and you would have like the magnet underneath the glass with the iron filings.
Mm.
And I don't know if you ever did this in school, but you would like have a magnet, and the magnet wasn't the attracting pole, it was like the opposite. And you were trying to like push these iron filings to the magnet, but it kept repelling them away. It kept repelling them away. But if you flip the magnet around and you flip it to the opposite pole, all of a sudden the iron filings would just come to the
Comes to
magnet so
you.
easily.
Yeah.
Yeah, just comes to you. So like if you're going to control anything, control your energy.
Mm-hmm.
Control your energy of allowing things in. Control your energy that is open and receiving, not trying to force. Don't be the magnet that is actually repelling the things away, because it is. If you are trying to force something, then you will not bring it to you. You're actually teaching this energy that we all live in that things are going to be hard and difficult, right? So just experiment a little bit. If you're trying to figure out, you've got maybe some life-changing decisions ahead or a personal transformation you want to make, but it feels really daunting, then just experiment with something really small. Like think about like what's one simple thing you can allow into your world today, and put a little energy on that, and just witness and see what happens, right? Because it's interesting when we it's interesting how much energy it can save us, and how much more we can build up our energy reserves when we stop trying to force things. And the real irony is that we actually will be able to do more as a result. And that is sometimes a hard thing to recognize at first, when we're used to working so dang hard for things, and you realize you actually don't have to do that. You kind of have to realize, who are you without working so dang hard?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a gap that we need to fill too, right? And that's where looking a little bit deeper into how else you spend your time. What do you think about instead? What feelings do you want to focus on having? If it's not hustle, grind, strife, stress, and overwhelm, there's a gap to fill there. And I would invite people to think about, if you're feeling overwhelmed by the pure process of letting go of that, it's because you're afraid of the gap that's going to get left behind, because you're
Yeah.
so accustomed to approaching life in that way. So, what do you want to fill that gap with? For me, it's still adventure. I mean, it's adventure. I'm still pushing myself. I'm still working hard to do things, but there's an exhilaration to it now that there wasn't before. I've replaced exhilaration from exhaustion, and I will take that any day.
Oh yeah.
But it had to come by replacing those old definitions, and we have to fill that gap, because you can't just leave it as a void of, I'm going to go from not working hard to not doing anything or not pushing myself. Think of it as not just ease and flow, but fill that gap. What are different feelings? What's a different experience? What's a different approach that you could consciously choose and control to take? And yeah, it's funny. It's like you could even feel the energy shift just talking about it that way. It's
Yeah.
cool.
I love that. Okay,
Yeah.
I think we'll wrap it up there. I love that exhilaration versus exhaustion. What an amazing goal. What an amazing feeling to
Yeah.
choose into, and still being able to value control and value ambition and value, summiting and getting to that next level, but taking it like a totally different approach to getting there with a lot of grace, a lot of self-love, a lot of empathy and alignment. So thank you so much for talking with us today, Elle.
Oh, my pleasure, Alyssa. It has been so awesome to be on. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and I trust that your listeners have as well.
Thank you. Can you share with everybody where they can find you? I know you have your book out too.
Yes, the simplest way to find me to start and come into my world would be to go to my book website. It's 90daylifebook.com. If you would like to go a step further and you're curious to learn more about expedition and having me as a guide on your journey to personal transformation, just go to the same link, 90daylifebook.com/support. And that breaks down more how I help people who want to go through a deeper journey. And there'll be links there to apply and come into my world and reach out to me there. That'll be the simplest way. And if
Awesome.
that's you, welcome to my world.
Thanks for listening with us today. This has been an episode of the Women of Ambition podcast with your host, Alyssa Calder-Hume.